Alright, now back to what you got to do to the stock airplane. When you have a stock, when you go with the brushless setup, you're going to get rid of the speed controller, and what that speed controller is partly wired to is this on-off switch. This stuff removes very easily. This here, 2 screws, pull it off. You can push this toggle, the toggle switch can be removed. This is a little nut on the push button switch. Loosen up the nut, you can push it right through. So in the end, you're going to have 2 holes. You're going to have a hole here and a hole here. You're going to pull out the wires for the switches and the buttons. You're going to loosen that screw on the stick mount. Pull on this stick mount. I was pointing on the front side of the camera where nobody could see it. And then you're going to pull the whole gearbox and motor right out through the front here. You might have to trim a little foam right down on the bottom because it's a tight fit, but it will come right out, and you just feed the wires for the speed controller and those switches that you removed. They come right underneath the little bulkhead there. You can just feed them all right out of the compartment and out of the airplane. So the only thing you'll have left in the airplane are your servos and your receiver, unless of course you're going to put your own 2.4 gigahertz receiver in here. Right now these are 2.4 gigahertz. After about a year and a half I changed it, like I said, because the 2.4 gigahertz radios take fewer batteries, a whole lot fewer, and it's just cheaper to operate. And I put a tactic system in there, so I put a tactic receiver in there using a tactic radio. And that gave me a little extra room, but not much. I'm currently going to change it over to a Spectrum system. I can get a 4-channel Spectrum receiver, much smaller. It's going to give me all kinds of room for batteries. And the Spectrum transmitter radio DX8 just gives me a whole lot more options on setting things up. And it also gives you those vocal warnings of what your switch positions are. I really need that. When you get older like me and you forget where your switches are and you start flipping the wrong switches, and you don't like to take your eyes off the airplane to look at your radio, you want to keep looking at the airplane. So I went with that newer DX8 setup, and I'm going to change the receiver again in there. But anyway, back to this airplane. All you're going to have left is a receiver and the servos. Then what you're going to do is you're going to feed, well, you're going to install your motor either on your gearbox or your outrunner motor onto your outrunner mount, and you're going to install the mount onto the stick mount again. You're going to have to connect the 3 wires for the motor to your new speed controller. You're going to do all that outside the airplane. Connect your wires to your motor to your new speed controller. You don't have those switches. You're not going to have any switches. Don't worry about those. And you're going to feed the speed controller back in through this hole. Here I am pointing to the back of the camera again. You're going to run your speed controller cables back through this hole into the front of the airplane, to the cockpit. And then when you get the motor, whether it's on the gearbox or on the outrunner mount, whichever way you go, when you get it in there and to slid onto your stick mount, you're going to put the screw back onto your back in through the hole there, and screw the mount back to your stick mount again. You're going to put your screw right in through that hole. Why is this thing losing focus? I don't know. It drives me nuts. But anyway, you're going to put your screw back through that hole and screw your mount back into the stick mount. The other thing I'm going to mention before I put this all back in the box is your tail wheel is not steerable. Now if you really want to, you can make your tail wheel steerable. The airplane I'm going to show you, my Blue Nose, I have done that on it. I made that one steerable. My other Harbor Freight P-51, the red nose one, the red and yellow nose one, the one at the fire plane, does not. It has the same stock tail wheel. You don't really need to change that. It works fine just like that. My other one I use with the stock tail wheel on it. But that's up to you if you want to get around to doing that. Okay, here is my Blue Nose, and now I'm going to show you my current setup on the Blue Nose Harbor Freight P-51. First off, I'm going to do is take this spinner off. It comes off real easy. It just gently pull and it will slide right off. Alright, you can see it in there. Here you can see my my black 8x6 prop, 3mm shaft, just like the stock shaft. I have in there my replacement gearbox. You can see the bottom ring, the bottom end of that gearbox is black. The spur gear, where I had to drill holes in order to access the screw point for the stick mount that's in the back there. Gotta rub my nose here. And I have the in runner mounted to the bottom of the gearbox. Of course, I had to install a new pinion gear in order to make that whole setup work. But that's how the front end looks. And the wires, of course, they run through. You can see the connections for the motor, and they run up towards the cockpit. We'll pop the cover off and we look inside. As you can see, I'm still using stock servos. They work great. Don't get all excited about having to change everything. This airplane, amazingly, is put together well. Yeah, these servos work fine. The other thing about this airplane that works well is they have probably some of the most rugged, beefier clevis pins that I have seen. That clevis there that snaps onto the rudder horn, that clevis is a bigger clevis, more stout than the one that's on that 1450mm P-51 way back there in the corner. It's got the same size control rods, it's just got a bigger clevis. So all the clevises on the Harbor Freight airplane are much stronger than any other airplane that I actually have those plastic clevises on. So they do make a stout airplane. So once again, the servos stock. Now what I have in there is a Tactic 6-channel receiver. You only need a 4-channel receiver. I have a 6-channel in there because it's just available. But with that 6-channel receiver in place, I can easily slide an 1800 milliamp hour battery in there. Now with the old stock receiver in place, this would not fit very easily, so I ended up doing is I trimmed a little bit. You can see the angle there. I trimmed a little bit of foam out in order to get this to seat in there, and it did. It's a little bit heavier, but I don't mind the heaviness. I just found that the airplane flies really good with that 1350, and I'll show you that. It slides right back in there, back to the bulkhead. You do have a little space up front, and with the stock receiver in there you wouldn't be able to slide forward, but with this receiver in there it can still slide forward. All you really need to do is just keep a piece of foam, a foam block, and just slip it down in there to wedge between the front of the battery and that bulkhead, and it will hold the battery in place. Sometimes I put another one block, and I wedge it between the right side fuselage and the battery just to hold the battery in place. If you want to, you can also just use Velcro. There's many ways of doing it, but that's the battery, and this is how it fits. It fits right there. Receiver fits right there. If you look inside, you can see the speed controller, the brushless speed controller, and it's connected to the EC3 connector for the battery, because generally when you get a small 3S battery, it's going to have an EC3 connector on it. Therefore, you get an EC3 connector on your speed controller. You can solder a connector on if you want to. I've done that several times. If you have the wrong size, if you have the wrong type plug on your speed controller or the wrong type plug on your battery, whichever way you want to go, if you can solder on and build up a connector that way. I tie off my wires so they run clean, and it gives me more room inside there. And the stock receiver, just to let you know, the stock receiver has a long, it's a 72 megahertz system, so it has a long antenna wire that runs through a tube all the way out and out the tail. And what I ended up doing when I did not change my when I used the original radio and the original receiver, I just took that antenna when it came out the tail, folded it outside back up underneath the belly, and taped it down. Just, you see those two pieces of tape? That's where I laid, three actually, that's where I used to lay the old long antenna wire. I just taped it to the bottom. That way it didn't drag behind the airplane. It was attached to the bottom of the airplane. It was still outside. It did its job. It worked good, and I was happy with it. But now I have a 2.4 gigahertz system. I don't have to worry about that. I do run one of my antennas. It's a diversity antenna. I run one of them right up so it sticks up outside. You don't have to. And the other one runs across and comes outside. I just wanted to have my antennas outside because of best reception. Never needed to worry about it. I could probably leave them inside and they'd be fine. But like I say, with the stock receiver, I never had any range issues. Sorry, not 300 yards. Yeah, I've gone as far as 250 to 300 yards. Maybe even more than that. But it says on the box, it will go up to, I believe, I can't say, I thought 1,600 feet. But you're never going to need to go that far. So there's no range issues with the stock radio and the stock receiver. As far as you're comfortable seeing that airplane, it will cover it, not to worry. But that's how I have this thing set up right now.